Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I want to talk about Sugar Ray Leonard, okay? Because I've got an opinion that a lot of people find very, very unpopular. So we're going to get a little bit potentially controversial here. Um, you may have heard of, the Four Kings. I'm sure you have. You're a boxing fan. Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, Thomas Hearns. Okay. Now, there's a book called The Four Kings about those four, about that era of fighting and how they all fought each other. But there's, I'm going to say that I'm going to say something quite controversial. I think Sugar Ray Leonard, he is my least favourite of the Four Kings. And that is not to say that he wasn't a great fighter, because he was. And that's not to say that he actually might not be the best of the four in terms of talent. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Leonard being my least favourite, and I want to explain to you why. Okay. Now, as I say, there is no doubt that Leonard was a great, great fighter. No question at all. He turned professional after winning the Olympic gold medal in 1976. He turned pro in February of '77, and he learnt the game the right way. He learnt the game through fighting very, very good opponents, getting rounds under his belt. Even his debut against Louis the Bull Vega, 6-rounder, he remembers that in interviews and says, I learned a lot from that. That's exactly how I wanted to be. His first two wins, the other one was against Willie Rodriguez, who was 10-1 at the time, was 6-round decisions. And then he moved on, and as his career progressed, he was fighting people like Dick Eklund, who you will know as Irish Mickey Ward's is his brother? Yeah, his brother, in it. I was going to say cousin, but it's actually his brother. Who trained Mickey Ward, especially for those Gatley fights. He beat him over 10 rounds. It was a unanimous decision. He beat Floyd Mayweather Sr., stopped him in 10 rounds. That was a 10-rounder. Beat Randy Shields, unanimous decision over 10. And that was a good fight. Shields was no mug. He got knocked out by Hearns. I think it was 3 rounds in a title defence against Hearns, but Shields wasn't a bad fighter at all. So he was learning. Leonard was learning the game properly, getting rounds under his belt, doing very, very well, and that prepared him for a world title shot against someone who many people consider was the fifth king, which was Wilfred Benitez. Benitez was himself a great, great fighter, 3-weight world champ. At 17 years of age, he beat Antonio Cervantes to win the WBA super lightweight title, not the WBC, I think it was WBA, I could be wrong about that. And he moved up to welterweight, won a title, and he would actually move up to light middleweight, knock out Morris Hope with one punch. And Benitez himself, a great fighter, 38 wins and a draw, no defeats when he took on Leonard. Leonard was the challenger. It was an old 15-rounder, and Leonard knocked out Benitez with, I think, a few seconds to spare. It wasn't a lot to spare, it really wasn't. No rematch, which was intriguing, but Leonard certainly proved himself in that fight against a very, very good champion, and God knows how much he must have learned in those 15 rounds. But I mean, he was ready to make that jump because he'd got rounds under his belt and he'd fought good men who he was going to learn something from, Well, after he'd beaten Benitez, instead of a rematch, he had Dave Boy Green, knocked him out in 4, and then he faced Roberto Duran, and Roberto Duran, another one of the Four Kings, who'd had an entire career at lightweight, one of the greatest lightweights ever. That was in the 70s. Roberto Duran came into that fight as a challenger with 72 wins and 1 defeat. And the defeat, God, I can't remember the name of the fight, I can see him in my mind's eye, but he beat Duran on points. He was over 10, and then Duran came back and beat him twice by stoppage. That's right, yeah. So Duran had proved himself to be one of the great lightweights of all time. And he jumps up 2 divisions, up to welterweight, fights Leonard in a brilliant, brilliant war. That was in 1980. Leonard had beaten Benitez in 79, so he'd been a champ for, I don't know, not that long. Because the Benitez fight, I think, was towards the end of 79. And then the first Duran fight would have been sort of May, June, July, summertime. In 80. So fair play to Leonard, he's taken on some good guys. But it was a brilliant fight, 15 rounds, and Duran badly shook Leonard early on in the second or the third round, big overhand right. Leonard's leg stiffened and wobbled. and they had a terrific tear up, absolutely fantastic. And Duran was given a unanimous decision. The rematch later on in 1980, I think it was in November, was the famous no mass fight where Leonard jitterbugged and showboated and basically beat up Duran's ego, forcing Duran to say, the hell with this, if you don't want to fight, I'm not going to fight. And he sort of walked out. He quit, not because he was physically losing, but he was mentally unraveling. He just had enough, the hell with this, I mean, his ego couldn't take it. Because Duran, as with most great fighters, the fuel that he had was for his ego. He was the great Roberto Duran, and he quit. And of course, it took him quite a few years to make amends for that. Duran, we all remember Duran as a great fighter, rightly so, but when he quit against Leonard, there were a lot of people in Panama who weren't happy with him. It wasn't until he beat Davey Moore for the light middleweight title, and then he was kind of back. But anyway, let's concentrate on Leonard. So he beats Duran. Now, they should have had a third fight, really. You'd think about it. A rubber match would be logical. It's one each. But no. Leonard moved on. He fought Larry Bonds. Stopped him in 10 rounds in a 15-rounder. He then moved up to light middleweight or super welterweight, if you prefer. Beat Ayab Kalouli, who at the time was 36 wins and no defeats. Stopped him in 9 rounds in a 15-rounder. Kalouli was, again, a terrific fighter. WBA, that was for the WBA super welterweight title. So Leonard is having this fantastic first 5 years of his career. Absolutely brilliant. And of course, then after Kalouli, who does he face? He faces Thomas Hearns in a welterweight unification, WBA, WBC, World Welterweight Championship. I don't think was the IBF around, but it wasn't. The IBF came shortly afterwards. Maybe even the same year, 1981. I can't remember the year the IBF was founded, but it was Larry Holmes picked up the belt, if I remember rightly. Anyway, this was definitely undisputed. WBA, WBC, the two ruling bodies. And it was the 1981 Fight of the Year for Ring Magazine, a brilliant fight. And Leonard stopped Hearns in 14 rounds of a 15-rounder. He turned hunter. At the time, Hearns was considered the guy who was coming at you. He was the hunter and you were the hunted. But Leonard managed to turn the fight on its head and knocked out Hearns in 14 rounds. And it was a great welterweight showdown, one of the greats. Did they have a rematch? No, they didn't, which was curious. Maybe Hearns couldn't make the weight, he had to move up. So instead, Leonard takes on Bruce Finch, wins in 3 rounds. And then he retires because he's got a detached retina, or a torn retina. And he's still a young man, Leonard. Now, that's the first half of his career. No doubt about it, he proved how great he was, without a shadow of a doubt. Stoppage wins over Benitez, Hearns, revenge over Duran. I mean, beaten Ayab Kalouli, he was undefeated. Terrific legacy, a brilliant fighter. And he retired. He came back a couple of years later, fought Kevin Howard, and had to come off the floor. He suffered a flash knockdown. Did not look good. Re-retired. And then in 1987, he came back to fight a very aged and a guy who was beginning to look vulnerable, marvellous Marvin Hagler. Now, Hagler, of course, one of the great middleweight champs, would retire with a 62 wins, 3 defeats, all on points and 2 draws record. He had his own career in the 70s, went down, did the Philly circuit, lost a couple of times, avenged those points defeats with knockout victories. Was left out in the cold for many years, got his title shot, a controversial draw. That was with Vito Antuofermo. Gets another title shot against Alan Minter in Britain, wins it, and then goes on a 7-year reign, which was brilliant. I mean, a brilliant fighter, Marvin Hagler. But in 1987, he was beginning to show some wear and tear. He'd fought John Mugabe, who'd given him a good fight, very good fight. He knocked out Mugabe eventually, but Mugabe was he was giving Marvin some problems. But Marvin's steel jaw, remember that uppercut from Mugabe landed on Marvin's jaw, and Marvin blinked and sort of carried on coming forward. That must have broken Mugabe's heart. and Marvin, but Marvin did look like he was slowing up a bit. And Leonard, of course, I remember the fight vividly. I remember the build-up and everything. We were like on fire for this fight. I mean, could Leonard do it? He'd had one fight in 5 years against Kevin Howard. He'd come off the floor. Surely he couldn't beat Marvin Hagler. Well, it was a close fight, and it's a fight I think at the time I scored it slightly for Marvin. It was over 12 rounds, not 15. Leonard negotiated down to 12 rounds from 15. By the way, Leonard did not have a traditional pathway to any titles. His career was very much about the individual. He had his advisor stroke manager, Mike Trainer, who was a lawyer, and together they mapped out a pathway for Leonard's career, did the negotiating, sorted out the purses and so on, and they managed to negotiate Marvin down to 12 rounds, which was regrettable because Marvin ended up losing a split decision, which again I thought you can make a case for Leonard winning, but to me, the guy who comes forward, who's got the heavier hands, the one who's more proactive, the guy who's looking for the opponent rather than skipping away from him, rather than landing pity-pat jabs and punches. It's not amateur boxing, it's professional boxing, and I thought Hagler won that fight. But they gave it to Leonard. Okay, fair enough. But you would think a natural would be a rematch. And Marvin wanted that, and Leonard said, no, I don't want the rematch. Why not? This is a brilliant fight. The public want it. You know, Marvin gave you a chance. Why aren't you giving Marvin a chance? Leonard said no to his, and I think that's to his detriment myself. Instead, he fought Donnie Lalonde, who was at the time was the WBC light heavyweight champ. Now Lalonde was a reasonable fighter, not the greatest light heavyweight champ ever. When he fought Leonard, he had 32 wins and 2 defeats. But here's the thing, he was an overachiever. And he actually spent most of his career with a damaged shoulder, which meant he couldn't throw, I think it was his right hand properly. He'd had reconstructive surgery on his shoulder following a hockey accident. So he was physically impaired, not the greatest champion ever, should we say. But Leonard not only took him on for his WBC light heavyweight title, also on the line was the vacant WBC super middleweight title. And this was the inaugural super middleweight title. And the deal was cut for Lalonde to come down to 160 and fight Leonard. Now, you're fighting for two belts, one of them a vacant one that's never even been heard of before, and you're dragging the champion down to 168, where he's never been before, and you're going to call yourself a 4-weight world champ if you beat him. Well, actually, Leonard did beat him, but he had to come off the floor in the 4th round. Leonard looked so much smaller than Lalonde, it was freakish. I mean, Leonard looked like he was wearing you could tell he was a welterweight. I mean, up at that 168 or whatever. Well, I can't remember what Leonard weighed for that. But he looked like a guy who wasn't in that division. But because he had such brilliant talent and Lalonde was limited, shall we say, at world level, Leonard managed to rally after the 4th round knockdown and knocked out Lalonde in 9 rounds. Okay, so suddenly he's won 2 more world titles. But it's kind of been manufactured, kind of in the way that Floyd Mayweather conducted the second half of his career. I often wonder if Floyd didn't look at Leonard's career and try to emulate it. This cherry picking, this business with taking individual fighters who are past it or a little bit older, or, you know, letting them get some more miles on the clock. Tyson Fury is currently in the throes of doing exactly the same thing. It's the same way of managing your career. You look for the right people at the right time. You let other people lose, then you say, well, why? What are you worried about? What do you mean I didn't fight him? He lost to so-and-so. Yeah, but you didn't beat him. You know, it's that sort of thing. Anyway, Leonard beat Lalonde, knocked him out in 9 rounds. That was a 12-rounder, 9th round knockout, and the ending was very picturesque because Leonard threw this enormous, speedy flurry of punches which knocked Lalonde. Lalonde never had a great defence. It knocked him flat on his side and he was out. So who does Leonard take on next? None other than Thomas Hearns, who also had picked up an inaugural super middleweight title. That was the WBO version. So they thought, let's have a unification. But here's the thing. 2 fights prior to fighting Leonard, Hearns had been knocked out in 3 rounds by Iran Barkley. In his previous fight, he'd won the vacant WBO super middleweight title by fighting James Kinchin, and he'd been floored badly. And Hearns looked like damaged goods. I mean, he won the decision. I think it might have even been a split decision over Kinchin. But he looked old and he looked battle worn. And Leonard took him on in the unification. It almost backfired on Leonard because he thought, oh, he's there for the taking. Leonard was down in the 3rd and the 11th round, even though in the 12th round, Leonard rallied very, very well. I mean, very, very impressively. But he escaped with a draw. It was a split draw. Okay, were they going to have a third fight? Maybe they'll have a third fight. You know, one draw, one, you know, a lot of people thought Hearns deserved to win that fight. I thought it was very close despite the knockdowns, but, you know, no. Instead, Leonard goes after having been nearly beaten by Hearns. He says, no, he said, no, I'm not having a third fight. Instead, I'll go fight Roberto Duran. And this was for the WBC super middleweight title, which Leonard held. So Duran, who's at this time is very, very old, is coming off a win over Iran Barkley, nevertheless, which was his last great hurrah. It was a very dull fight. This was their long, long, long overdue rubber match, and Leonard won a unanimous decision. Now, that was the last victory for Leonard, because a year and a bit later, he took on Terry Norris down at super welterweight. And that, in fairness to Leonard, in this very, to me, very sort of questionable second career of Leonard, that was the one really brave thing he did. Because Norris, although he didn't have a great chin, had been looking like a killer. And he went in with 26 wins and 3 defeats, and he was knocking people out left, right and centre. And very, very explosive, offensive fighter, kind of disdained defence at times, Norris. He was too much for Leonard, knocked him down in the 2nd round and the 7th round, and won a unanimous decision. And Leonard did very, very well to show a lot of courage and last the distance. And then Leonard retired for good. Well, not for good. Actually, let me correct myself. He retired in 1991 following the Norris defeat, saying that's my lot. But 6 years later, he came back and fought Hector Camacho. Why he did this, I don't know. Camacho was way past his best. What a defeat of Camacho would have done, I just don't know. Leonard was roughly 40 at the time. He got knocked out in 5 rounds, and Camacho was very much a boxer rather than a puncher. But he beat the crap out of Leonard and stopped him in 5 rounds. And then it really was over for Ray Leonard. So to me, Ray Leonard, without question, proved his greatness in that first career, the first 5 years of his career. But that second career, from Marvin Hagler onwards, where he didn't give Marvin a rematch, he got 2 belts off Donnie Lalonde, who was a very limited light heavyweight. He fought Hearns when he thought Hearns was completely shot or near as damn it. He fought a very old Duran instead of fighting a rubber match with Hearns. And then he got his arse handed to him by Norris. Okay. That second half of his career, I remember watching it and seeing it unfold, and I was thinking, all this cherry picking and these picking up belts, you know, against people who are sort of B-level or who are old, or, you know, no. This is affecting Leonard's legacy, and it's actually obscuring the greatness that happened in that first 5 years. So for that reason, Leonard is my least favourite of the 4 kings, because the other 3, Duran, Hagler, Hearns, ducked no one, never looked for the easy route, ever. Leonard, most certainly in the second half of his career, did look for the easy route. And that's why he's my least favourite of the 4 kings. I know some of you are going to disagree. You're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? He was brilliant. Yes, he was brilliant. But you must wait for the dust to settle on a career before you make a judgment. And there are too many looking for the easy route for me in that second half of that career. Leave your comments below. Some of you are going to disagree. If you do it respectfully, I don't mind. I'll have a chat with you. Maybe you think Leonard's the best. What do you think I've missed? If you don't agree with me, what have I missed? Yeah, just leave your comments below. Thank you, as always, for your time. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. If you're new, please subscribe. Build up Joe Stunner Boxing. Let's get some more subscribers. Spread the word about the channel. And I'm looking forward to reading your comments. Like the video if you liked it. And, of course, as always, take care of yourselves. We'll speak again soon. Bye for now.